My name is Elena Carter. I'm 28 years old, and I used to think moral questions were just that, questions. The kind you debated over coffee, laughed about, and then forgot, until one of them quietly broke my relationship apart. It started with something so simple it almost felt childish. We were sitting in a crowded lecture hall, the kind with dim lighting and steep rows that made you feel pulled toward whatever truth was about to be revealed. My boyfriend had insisted we go. He loved things like this: logic, philosophy, arguments that made the world feel clean and measurable. I didn't, but I went anyway. The professor described a runaway trolley, 5 people on the track, no brakes, then another track, 1 person. You can turn the trolley, he said. You can kill 1 to save 5. A pause moved through the room, full of invisible tension. Then hands began to rise. Most people chose to turn. I did too. It felt obvious, instinctive. Save more lives, reduce harm. That's what good people do, right? I remember glancing at him after I raised my hand, expecting a small nod, maybe even approval. Instead, he was already looking at me, not surprised, not impressed, just watching, like he had learned something important. When the discussion ended, we walked out into the late afternoon light. The city felt louder than usual, cars rushing past, voices overlapping, everything moving too fast. He said nothing at first. Then, almost casually, like he was finishing a thought he'd been holding back, he said, "You'd switch the track." I shrugged. Most people would. That's not what I asked. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. I mean, yes, I said. 5 people versus 1? It's not even a hard choice. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile people wear when they've already decided something about you. You always choose the safer answer. I frowned. Safer? The answer that lets you feel like a good person. That is the good answer. Or the convenient one. I stopped walking. Convenient. He turned to face me, calm, composed, almost clinical. Think about it, he said. You're deciding one person matters less, that their life becomes expendable because it benefits more people. That's not what I said, but that's what you did. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, because suddenly it no longer felt like we were talking about a hypothetical. It felt like I was being assessed, measured, quietly found lacking. I didn't kill anyone, I said, trying to keep my tone steady. It's a thought experiment. Every choice starts as a thought, he replied. A beat of silence stretched between us. Cars passed. Someone laughed nearby. Life kept moving. But something had shifted, subtly, irreversibly. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, that's how people justify hurting someone close to them. I blinked. What? They tell themselves it's for a greater good, he said, that it makes sense, that it's necessary. I stared at him, trying to understand why this suddenly felt personal. Are you saying I would do that? He shrugged again, as if it barely mattered. I'm saying people reveal themselves in these scenarios. And just like that, the conversation ended. But the feeling didn't. For the rest of that evening, and long after, I couldn't shake the sense that I hadn't just answered a question. I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking, and worse, I no longer knew what answer he had wanted from me. I thought it would end there. A strange conversation, a disagreement, something we'd laugh off later. It didn't. The next day he brought it up again, not casually, deliberately. We were at his apartment, sitting across from each other at the small kitchen table. His laptop was open in front of him, like he was about to present a case. That should have warned me. Let's try another one, he said. I sighed. Seriously? Just answer it. There was no softness in his tone, no room to refuse without sounding like I had something to hide. So I nodded. You're not the driver this time, he said. You're standing on a bridge, same trolley, same 5 people. I already knew where it was going. And? I asked. There's a man next to you. If you push him, he falls onto the tracks. He dies, but he stops the trolley. The 5 live. He leaned back and watched me. Do you push him? The question hung between us. Yesterday, I hadn't hesitated. Today, I did. No, I said. His eyebrow lifted. No? It's different. How? Because this time I'd be killing him directly. And yesterday you weren't? I was choosing between outcomes. That's not the same as physically pushing someone. He stared at me as if waiting for me to correct myself. You're being inconsistent, he said at last. I felt the same tightness in my chest. No, I'm not. You said saving 5 matters more than saving 1 in that situation. In every situation, if your logic is real. That's not how people work. That's exactly how people should work. There it was again. Not a discussion, a correction. You can't change your principles just because the second version feels uncomfortable, he said. Either you believe in maximizing outcomes or you don't. I believe in context, I said, sharper now. In intention, in emotion, he cut in. I went quiet because of the way he said it. Flat, dismissive, as if emotion were proof of weakness. You're not thinking, he added. You're reacting. That doesn't make me wrong. It makes you unreliable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, out of nowhere, he said, She used to answer these perfectly. I blinked. Who? My ex. Something cold slid into my stomach. She understood consistency, he went on. If she chose a principle, she followed it through, even when it was uncomfortable. I forced a laugh. Good for her. But it didn't sound like a joke. It sounded like a comparison, and we both knew it. She thought deeper, he added. She didn't let emotion interfere. There it was, a standard. And I wasn't meeting it. I looked at him, really looked this time. The calm posture, the measured tone, the way he framed everything as if there were already a correct answer and I was only there to prove whether I could find it. Then something clicked. You're not asking me these questions to understand me, I said slowly. He tilted his head. What do you mean? You already decided what the right answers are. That's because there are right answers. No, I said, shaking my head. You're not discussing this. You're evaluating me. His expression didn't change, but the silence that followed felt confirming. You want to see whether I think the way you do, I continued, whether I pass. And if you don't? He asked. The question was quiet, but it hit harder than anything else he had said. I swallowed. Then what? He watched me for a long moment. Then he said, Then we're not aligned. Aligned, like we were a structure, a design, something that either functioned or didn't. Not people, not messy, not human. A flicker of anger rose under my skin. So this is a test. It's not a test, he said calmly. It's compatibility. With a right answer. With a consistent one. I leaned back in my chair. And your ex passed. He didn't smile. He didn't deny it either. She understood me, he said simply. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I cared about her, but because I suddenly understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't about philosophy. It wasn't about moral dilemmas. It was about control, about shaping the way I thought, about deciding whether I fit a framework he had already built. And if I didn't, I wouldn't be adjusted. I would be replaced. That realization settled quietly, but it settled hard. For the first time, I stopped trying to figure out the right answer to his questions. I started wondering why he needed me to have one at all. For a while, I told myself I was overthinking it, that this was just his personality. Some people liked structure, liked logic, liked things that made the world feel predictable. Maybe I just didn't, so I stopped arguing. Not because I agreed, but because every time I pushed back, the conversation became something else. Not a discussion, but a quiet dismantling of whatever I said until it no longer sounded solid enough to defend, and I was getting tired. So when he brought up another scenario a few nights later, I didn't react the same way. I just listened. You're a doctor this time, he said, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. 5 patients with moderate injuries, 1 patient in critical condition. I said nothing. You can save the 5, but the 1 dies, or you spend all your time on the 1, and the 5 die. He paused. Which do you choose? I should have answered, played the game the way he wanted. Instead, I asked, why do you keep doing this? His expression didn't change. Answer the question. No. The word came out before I could soften it. He straightened slightly. No? I'm not doing this again. It's a simple scenario. It's not about the scenario, I said. It's about what you're trying to prove. And what is that? That there's something wrong with the way I think. A beat passed. Then, calmly, if there is, wouldn't you want to know? That should have been a clear red flag. But instead, I felt that old pull again, the need to defend myself, to prove I wasn't what he was quietly implying. So I answered, I'd save the 5. Of course I would. It made sense. It always made sense. But this time, instead of certainty, I felt unease, because I already knew what he would say next. Good. For the first time, it didn't sound like approval. It sounded like confirmation of something I didn't understand yet. A week later, the question stopped being theoretical. That was when everything changed. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because I had been waiting all day to see him. We had plans, nothing big, just dinner, something normal, something that still felt like us before everything started turning into this. Around 5, my phone buzzed. I can't make it tonight. That was it. No explanation, no apology, just absence. I stared at the screen, my stomach dropping. Why? I typed back. A few minutes passed. Something came up. Of course it did. When will you be free? A longer pause. I don't know. That was when the unease sharpened. Is everything okay? The typing bubble appeared, disappeared. Then came the message that made everything click into place. I had to help her. Her. I didn't need to ask who. His ex, of course. What do you mean? I typed, even though I already knew. She's in a difficult situation, and I'm the only one who can help right now. My grip tightened around my phone. We had plans. I know. That was it. No, I'm sorry. No hesitation. Just acknowledgement. Like it didn't matter. So you canceled on me. It's not about canceling. It's about priorities. Something inside me went very still. Priorities? Yes, I swallowed. And she's more important? It's not about importance. Then what is it about? A pause. Then, the outcome. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. Not a classroom discussion, not a hypothetical. Real, messy, personal. She needs me more than you do right now, he continued. Helping her creates the better result. I let out a short, disbelieving breath. You're serious? I'm being rational. You're choosing her. I'm choosing the option that does the most good. The words hit me harder than they should have, because I had heard them before, just in another form. 5 lives, 1 life, better outcome, greater good, except this time I was the one being left on the track. So what? I said slowly. I'm just expendable? That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. No, he replied calmly. You're hearing it emotionally. Of course I was, because I was the one being hurt. I had a problem today too, I said, my voice tightening. What kind of problem? It doesn't matter. Then how can I judge it fairly? Not evaluate. Judge. Cleaner. But it meant the same thing, like my life needed to be weighed before it could count. I didn't ask you to judge it, I said. I wanted you there. Silence. Then, and if being there for you means abandoning someone who needs me more? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You don't even hear yourself. I hear myself perfectly. That's the problem. Another pause. Then, softer but not kinder. You're thinking about this the wrong way. No, I said quietly. I think I finally understand it the right way. He didn't respond. Maybe he thought I would come around, that I would adjust the way I always had. But something had shifted, not all at once, just enough for me to see the pattern clearly, the logic, the structure beneath everything he did. And for the first time, I stopped trying to fit into it, because I realized something I hadn't before. In his world, there would always be a version of events where I was the one that made sense to lose. After that night, nothing exploded. Things rearranged, quietly. like furniture being moved in the dark while you were still inside the room. Nothing looked completely different, but nothing felt the same. He still texted, still called, still acted as though everything between us remained intact. But now I could see the pattern underneath it all. Every choice passed through the same filter. What reduced friction? What protected his image? What kept his preferred version of events in place? And I already knew where I stood inside that structure. A few days later, I found out how far it had gone. Not from him, of course not. From a mutual friend who pulled me aside after work, her face careful and uneasy. "Hey, I don't know if you know this," she said, "but there's been some talk." My stomach dropped. "What kind of talk?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything before she spoke. "About you." I forced a small, tight smile. "What about me?" "That you handled something badly," she said. "That you got emotional, and he had to step in before it turned into a bigger mess." For a second, I didn't understand, because there had been no mess, no incident I had created, no mistake to fix, so I asked the only question that mattered. "What did he say exactly?" She looked even more uncomfortable. "I don't think he meant it in a bad way. What did he say?" Another pause. "Then, he said you were upset about his ex being involved in something, and he had to calm things down before it became public drama." That was clearer. Still neat enough to sound reasonable, still vague enough to make me sound unstable, but clearer. I went very still, because I knew that language. I had heard it before. Same logic. Same repackaged justification. A greater good version of the truth. "And people believed him?" I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I confronted him that night. Not angrily, not dramatically, just directly. "Why are you telling people I created drama?" He barely looked surprised. "I didn't say that. You said I mishandled something and you had to step in." "I said I had to calm it down." "That's the same thing." "No," he said calmly. "It's context." Of course it was. Everything was context when he needed it to be. A cleaner version of the truth that left him looking reasonable and me looking unstable. "You made me sound like the problem," I said. "You were reacting in a way that could have made the situation worse." "What situation?" He paused, just long enough for it to feel intentional. "You were upset about her being involved." "With what?" He exhaled lightly, as if he were being patient with me. "With reaching out. With needing my help. With being back in contact." That was at least something solid, still ugly, still manipulative, but no longer abstract. "What does that have to do with telling people I needed to be managed? You weren't going to handle it calmly." "You mean I wasn't going to accept it quietly?" He ignored that. "So I handled it before it became a bigger issue." I stared at him. "You're talking about a reaction I never even had. It could have happened. That doesn't justify anything." It prevented escalation. There it was again, the same structure, not responding to reality. Controlling the story before reality had the chance to speak. "You made me look unstable," I said. "I made sure things didn't get worse. At my expense. At the smallest possible cost." The words hit harder than I expected. Not minimal cost this time. Smallest possible cost. Smoother. But no better, like that was what I was. A manageable sacrifice. A price he could live with. And suddenly everything snapped into place. The trolley. The bridge. The doctor. The logic threaded through all of it. "You didn't just cancel on me," I said slowly. "You replaced me." "That's not accurate. You chose her." "I chose the option that reduced fallout." "And I was the fallout?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence answered for him. A few days later, I saw them together, not by accident, not by surprise, just inevitably. They were standing outside a cafe, talking like nothing had ever happened between them. Like history had no weight. Like I had no weight. And the worst part was how calm he looked. Centered. Certain. The same way he always looked when he believed he had made the correct decision. She laughed at something he said. He smiled. For a moment it looked effortless. Exactly the kind of calm alignment he was always talking about. And I understood something then. I hadn't only been replaced. I had been edited out, removed because I didn't fit the version of life he wanted to maintain, because I asked questions, because I felt things he couldn't file into clean categories, because I didn't always give the answer he wanted. I turned away before they could see me. Not because I was afraid, because I didn't need to watch anymore. I had seen enough. For the first time, I understood the real version of all those scenarios he kept giving me. Not the doctor, not the trolley, not the 5 lives versus 1. The real one. The one he never said out loud. The one where, if sacrificing one person made everything cleaner, he wouldn't hesitate. And this time, that person was me. I didn't confront him again right away. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally understood something I hadn't before. Arguing with him was useless. Not because he was right, because he never argued to understand. He argued to win, to define the frame, to decide what counted as truth before the conversation even started. So instead of reacting, I started paying attention, really paying attention, to the words he used, to the shape of his explanations, to the assumptions hidden underneath what he called logic. Once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It started with a message. You knew I had to help her. I stared at it longer than I should have, because no, I didn't. I had never agreed to that. I had never said, if she needs you, I come second. I had never chosen that arrangement. But somehow he spoke as though I had, as though it had already been decided. You agreed to this, he added in the next message. That made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so clean, so confident, so disconnected from reality. When did I agree to that? I replied. A few seconds later, you stayed. I went still, because for one moment that almost made sense. And that was the problem. We met in person that night, not at his place, not at mine, somewhere neutral. A quiet cafe with soft lighting and too much space between tables, like it had been designed for conversations people didn't want overheard. He was already there when I arrived, calm, composed, exactly the same, like nothing had shifted, like I hadn't been slowly erased from his life and replaced with a cleaner alternative. I sat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You've been distant." Of course I had. "You've been rewriting reality," I replied. His expression didn't change. "I've been clarifying it." "There's that word again." He leaned forward, fingers interlaced. "You knew who I was from the beginning." "No," I said quietly. "I knew who you presented yourself as." "That's the same thing." "No," I repeated. "It isn't." A pause. Then, "You stayed. That implies agreement." There it was. That twist again. The way he could bend reality into something that sounded reasonable if you didn't look too closely. "I stayed because I cared about you," I said. "Not because I agreed to be optional." "You weren't optional." "Then why was I always the one being sacrificed?" His jaw tightened just slightly. "Because you could handle it." The answer came too quickly, too smoothly, like he had justified it to himself 100 times already. I stared at him. "You hurt me because you thought I could take it?" "I made decisions based on what would hurt least overall. Cleaner. Still the same." "I'm not a pain calculation," I said, my voice low. "I'm a person." "And people exist inside larger realities," he replied, "whether they like it or not." That detachment again, that ability to zoom out so far that individual pain became negligible. "You didn't ask me," I said. "I didn't need to." "Exactly." Silence settled between us. Heavy, final. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to fix it. I wasn't trying to explain myself more clearly. I wasn't searching for the right words that might make him understand. Because I finally realized something that changed everything. Consent doesn't look like staying. It doesn't look like silence. It doesn't look like adapting yourself over and over until you no longer recognize the shape you've been forced into. Consent is clear, chosen, freely given. And what I had given him was none of those things. I reached into my bag and placed a small envelope on the table. He glanced at it, then back at me. "What's that?" "Everything you assumed I'd keep offering." He frowned and opened it. Inside were the practical things I had quietly put in place for him over time. 2 professional introductions I had made on his behalf. a recommendation I had agreed to pass along, and access to a shared folder of project contacts and planning notes he had been leaning on for months. Clearer, real, still the same beat. His expression shifted, just slightly. "This isn't necessary," he said. "It is, bon. You're being reactive." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being intentional." A beat. "You're making a mistake." "Am I?" "Yes," he said. "You're taking away something useful from both of us." I almost smiled, because there it was again. Even now, he could only frame loss in terms of usefulness. Not trust, not respect, not what had been broken, just function. "I'm removing myself," I corrected. "There's a difference." He looked at me for a long moment, searching for the angle that might pull me back. "You're overcorrecting," he said finally. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting for the first time." And just like that, the balance shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough that for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't the one being judged anymore. He didn't stop me when I stood up. That was the first thing I noticed, not because he didn't care, because he was still trying to understand what had shifted and whether he could still undo it. "You're walking away," he said, his voice steady. "Yes." Just like that, I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without softening what I saw. "It was never just like that," I said calmly. "It just took me this long to see it clearly." A pause. Then he leaned back slightly. "You're making an emotional decision." Of course I was, but not in the way he meant. "No," I said. "I'm making a conscious one." "There's a difference?" "Yes. One is impulsive, the other is deliberate." "And this is deliberate?" "It is." He nodded slowly, like he was working through the information. "And what exactly are you choosing then?" I almost laughed. Even now, he needed to turn it into a framework. Something definable. Something he could pick apart. "I'm choosing myself," I said. "That's inefficient. That's human." Silence settled between us again. But this time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt finished. As I walked out of the cafe, the air felt different, lighter. Not because nothing hurt, because I finally understood what I had been carrying. Not confusion, not doubt. A question that was never mine to answer. 5 lives, 1 life. Turn the track. Push the man. Save more. Lose less. It all sounded so clean when it stayed theoretical. So simple when no one you loved was standing on either side of the equation. But real life didn't work like that. In real life, you don't get to reduce people to numbers. You don't get to decide someone is the easiest loss just because it keeps everything else neat. And you don't get to call that rational when it's really just convenient. A week later, he called. I didn't pick up. He texted, "You're overreacting." I didn't respond. Another message. "You'll realize this doesn't make sense." Still nothing. Then, finally, "You're choosing the wrong outcome." I stared at that message for a long time, not because I doubted myself, because I finally understood what he couldn't. There was no wrong outcome anymore, because I was no longer living inside his framework. I wasn't trying to be the better option, the calmer one, the more reasonable one, the more logical one. I was just done. The last time I saw him, it wasn't planned. We crossed paths on a quiet street and both stopped for a second too long. He looked the same, composed, certain, but there was something else now. Something faintly unsettled. "You really went through with it," he said. "Yes." He studied me like he was still looking for the flaw in my decision. "You gave up something stable." "I left something unbalanced." "You could have adjusted." "I already did," I said. "Too many times." A pause. Then, "You're trading long-term benefit for short-term emotion." I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I'm choosing self-respect over convenience." For the first time, he didn't have an immediate answer, and that silence told me everything. Because in the end, the question was never about saving 5 people. It was never really about logic, or consistency, or outcomes. It was about something much simpler, something he never understood. Who gets to decide what a person is worth? And for a long time, I let him decide that for me. Not anymore. Because if there is one thing I learned from all of this, it's that the moment you let someone reduce you to a number, you've already lost. And the moment you stop letting them, you take everything back.